There's a certain kind of song that lived on every radio, in every kitchen, every car ride, and then, somewhere along the way, just quietly disappeared. Not because it was bad, usually because something louder came along. If you grew up in the 1970s, you know exactly what that feels like. These are the 15 forgotten songs from the 70s everyone used to know. Number 15, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, by Looking Glass. Looking Glass was a band out of Rutgers University in New Jersey, formed in 1969 by singer and guitarist Elliot Lurie, along with Larry Gonski, Jeff Grob, and Peter Sweevil. They were a bar band first, playing frat parties and local venues, before catching the attention of Clive Davis, who signed them to Epic Records. Brandy wasn't even supposed to be a single. It was the B-side to a track called Don't It Make You Feel Good, which went nowhere. Then, a radio promoter named Robert Mandel walked into Washington, D.C.'s WPGCAM with a test pressing of the band's debut album and persuaded program director Harv Moore to give the other song a spin. Moore put Brandy into heavy rotation for 2 days. The station switchboard, in Moore's own words, lit up like a Christmas tree. He said he'd never seen a response like that in 15 years in radio. Epic Rush released the single in June 1972. It hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on August 26, 1972, and stayed on the chart for 16 weeks. It went gold almost immediately. The name Brandy itself became more popular for newborn girls in America. It ranked 353rd in 1971, jumped to 140th in 1972, and climbed to 82nd by 1973. Even Barry Manilow was affected. His 1974 hit was originally titled Brandy, too, but he renamed it Mandy specifically to avoid being confused with the Looking Glass song. The band never matched that height again. Their second album produced a minor hit, Jimmy Loves Mary Ann, which reached number 33 in 1973. Lurie left in 1974. The rest of the band eventually became a heavy metal outfit called Stars, which is not the direction anyone saw coming. But the song itself endured quietly across karaoke bars and oldies stations for decades, until the 2017 film Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 brought it back in a way nobody expected. Number 14, Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks.
We had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun.
Terry Jacks was a Canadian musician and producer who had been part of a Vancouver group called the Poppy Family with his then-wife Susan Jacks. When that chapter ended, he struck out on his own. And somewhere in that process, he found a song that had been sitting quietly in the background of pop history since the early 1960s. The original was Jacques Brel's Le Moribond, written by the Belgian singer in 1961, about a dying man saying farewell to the people he loved. American poet Rod McEwen had adapted it into English under the title Seasons in the Sun, and the Kingston Trio recorded it in 1964. Jacks discovered it through his friendship with the Beach Boys, for whom he had produced some sessions for their 1971 album Surf's Up. He brought the song to them thinking it could work for Carl Wilson. A version was started but never finished. Mike Love later admitted they tried it and decided it was, in his words, too wimpy for them. Jacks kept it. He rewrote portions of the lyrics, finding the original too macabre, and recorded his own version in Vancouver in 1973, partly inspired by a close friend who was dying of leukemia. He released it on his own label, Goldfish Records. The song reached number 1 in Canada in January 1974. Then Bell Records distributed it in the United States. On March 2, 1974, it hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 3 weeks. Billboard ranked it the second best-selling single of the entire year. It sold more than 14 million copies worldwide, still among the biggest-selling singles by any Canadian artist in history. David Foster played the piano arpeggio parts on the recording very early in his career. Number 13, Wildfire by Michael Murphy.
And the pony she named Wildfire.
In 1975, Michael Murphy, who hadn't yet added his middle name Martin to his professional credits, released a song that nobody quite knows how to categorize. It's not exactly country, not exactly soft rock. It's a somber, atmospheric story song about a ghost horse and a woman who freezes to death in a Nebraska winter, and it reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went to number 1 on the adult contemporary chart. He wrote it with collaborator Larry Kanzler while they were both burning through marathon sessions working on a concept album for Kenny Rogers. One night, Murphy fell asleep on Kanzler's floor, dreamed the song in its entirety, and woke Kanzler up to finish it before he forgot. He said the inspiration came from a ghost horse legend his grandfather had told him as a boy in Texas. The Western Writers of America later named it one of the top 100 Western songs of all time. The song was platinum certified by the RIAA, selling over 2 million copies in the United States alone. Murphy later had a string of country hits in the 1980s, including What's Forever For and A Long Line of Love, and eventually became one of the leading voices in cowboy music. But Wildfire is what most people remember, if they remember it at all. David Letterman became publicly obsessed with it during a 2007 stretch on The Late Show, spending several nights riffing on it with his bandleader Paul Schaffer, which is, honestly, a fitting tribute. Number 12, Midnight at the Oasis by Maria Muldaur. Maria Muldaur had come up through the New York folk scene of the early 1960s, singing with the Even Dozen Jug Band, and later the Jim Kweskin Jug Band, with her then-husband Jeff Muldaur. By 1973, the marriage had ended, and she was putting together her first solo album for Warner Brothers Records with producer Lenny Waronker. The album was nearly complete when Waronker mentioned they could use one more mid-tempo track to balance things out. Muldaur turned to David Nichtern, a guitarist who had been around the sessions and who had written a tune she remembered but hadn't thought much of. Nichtern played it. Waronker said, "Oh, that's cute." They called in a group of studio musicians and cut it. Nichtern later recalled that the song had been written with some help from, as he put it, a girl, a waterbed, feta cheese and grape leaves, and a Martin guitar. The details of the inspiration he kept mostly to himself. The song was released in early 1974. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was ranked as the number 13 song of the entire year by Billboard. It was nominated for both Record of the Year and Song of the Year at the Grammy Awards, losing to Olivia Newton-John and Barbra Streisand, respectively. The guitarist on the track was Amos Garrett, whose electric guitar solo became nearly as famous as the song itself. Muldaur had one more Hot 100 entry with a cover of I'm a Woman in 1974, but never charted in the US again. She kept recording and touring regardless, releasing albums across multiple genres for decades. Number 11, Knock 3 Times by Tony Orlando and Dawn.
Knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me.
Tony Orlando had already been in the music business for years. He'd had a minor hit as a teenager in the early 1960s, when he found himself working as a publishing executive at CBS and reluctantly agreed to front a studio recording as a session favor. The result was Knock 3 Times, released in 1970 under the name Tony Orlando and Dawn, with backing vocalists Thelma Hopkins and Joyce Vincent Wilson. The song hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in February 1971 and held that position for 3 weeks. It also reached number 1 in the UK, Canada, and Australia. The follow-up, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree, became even bigger. It reached number 1 in 1973 and was named the best-selling single worldwide for that year. The group went on to host their own CBS variety series from 1974 to 1976. But Knock 3 Times was the beginning of all of it, a cheerful, slightly absurd, upstairs-downstairs love story that planted itself in the brain and didn't leave. Orlando eventually stepped back from music in the late 1970s following personal losses, including the death of his close friend, Freddie Prinze, in 1977. He returned to performing in Las Vegas and on the touring circuit, and has continued working for decades. The group's run from 1970 to 1976 produced a string of recognizable records that defined the softer side of AM radio in the early part of that decade. Knock 3 Times being the one that started it all.
Means you ain't gonna show.
Number 10, The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia by Vicki Lawrence.
He was on his way home from Candletop. Been 2 weeks gone and he thought...
Vicki Lawrence was best known in 1973 as a regular on The Carol Burnett Show, a comedian and actress, not primarily a recording artist. The song was written by Bobby Russell, who had also written Honey and Little Green Apples, and was originally offered to Cher, who passed on it. It was then offered to Lawrence's then-husband, producer Snuff Garrett. Lawrence recorded it, not with any expectation of a major hit. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in April 1973, staying at the top for 2 weeks and sold over 1 million copies. The song is a murder ballad with a twist at its center, a story of a brother who comes home to find his wife has been unfaithful, arrives too late to prevent a killing, and is himself executed for it, while the narrator reveals the real killer's identity only at the very end. For a number 1 pop hit in 1973, it's a remarkably dark piece of storytelling. Reba McEntire later recorded a well-known version of the song in 1991, which brought it to a new country audience. Lawrence had no further major pop hits of her own. She returned to television, continuing on The Carol Burnett Show, and later landing the long-running sitcom Mama's Family.
That's a night that they hung an innocent man.
Number 9, Coconut by Harry Nilsson.
Now let me get this straight, you put the lime in the coconut.
Harry Nilsson is one of those figures in 1970s music who existed slightly outside the normal rules. He was a gifted songwriter and vocalist who wrote Everybody's Talkin', made famous by Fred Neil and then by the Midnight Cowboy soundtrack, and One, recorded by Three Dog Night. He was a close friend of John Lennon and Ringo Starr. Paul McCartney called him his favorite American artist, and he could write a song like Coconut, a circular, absurdist novelty built around a single chord, and make it stick to the brain permanently. Coconut was released in 1972 from the album Nilsson Schmilsson and reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. The entire song runs on one chord, E7, from start to finish. It tells the story of a woman who calls her doctor at midnight complaining of a stomachache after mixing coconut and lime juice. The doctor's prescription turns out to be more coconut and lime. It has appeared in film and television soundtracks, so many often over the years, including Reservoir Dogs and a well-known Coca-Cola commercial, that younger generations tend to recognize it without knowing who made it or when. Nilsson himself had a complex career, full of brilliant records that were often commercially uneven, and he died in 1994. Coconut is the one that keeps circling back.
Call me in the morning, if you call me in the morning, I'll tell you.
Number 8, Vehicle by Ides of March.
I'm your vehicle, baby. Take it anywhere you want to go.
The Ides of March were a Chicago-based band that had been working the circuit since the mid-1960s, before landing a horn-heavy, high-energy funk rock track in 1970 that went to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. Vehicle was written by the band's vocalist and frontman Jim Peterick, who would later go on to co-write Eye of the Tiger with Survivor, a song most people know considerably better. The track is built around an aggressive brass section and a driving beat, with Peterick delivering a confident, almost theatrical vocal about a man with a powerful car and questionable intentions toward a hitchhiking woman. For a moment in 1970, it was everywhere. The Ides of March had been together since 1964, working club circuits in and around Chicago before this record gave them a national audience almost overnight. The band never charted as high again. By the mid-1970s, the group had disbanded, and Peterick moved on to other projects before co-founding Survivor in 1978. Vehicle occasionally turns up in movie soundtracks and sports broadcasts, where its energy translates instantly, but most people who recognize it can't tell you who made it.
You got to love ya. I need ya. I want you got to have.
Number 7, Me and You and Everyone We Know by Brewer and Shipley. Brewer and Shipley were a Missouri-born folk duo, Mike Brewer and Tom Shipley, who came out of the early 1970s singer-songwriter movement. They are remembered primarily for One Toke Over the Line, a 1971 folk song that reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and caused a minor controversy at the time over its subject matter, despite being performed on the Lawrence Welk Show without incident, which is its own kind of story. Their 1971 album Tarkio is the one that holds up. It's a loose, warm, country folk record that captures something specific about that moment. The late counterculture easing into something more domesticated, less confrontational. The songwriting is patient and unshowy, and the harmonies between Brewer and Shipley were genuinely good. One Toke Over the Line reached number 10 on the Hot 100 and number 1 on the Adult Contemporary chart, despite its subject matter raising eyebrows at the time. Lawrence Welk's orchestra performed it on national television, introducing it to the wrong audience entirely. The duo never achieved mainstream breakout success beyond that one notable single, but their catalog has retained a loyal following among people who found it at the right time. Number 6, Drift Away by Dobie Gray.
Day after day, I'm more confused.
Dobie Gray had been around since the early 1960s. His 1965 single, The In Crowd, had reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100 and become a defining anthem of that moment. But Drift Away is the one that followed him everywhere. Released in 1973, it reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the defining soft rock records of that year. The song was written by Mentor Williams, whose brother Paul Williams was also a successful songwriter and performer. Dobie Gray's version is built on a slow, patient groove with a soulful vocal performance that makes the plea for music to carry you away from the noise of everyday life feel completely genuine. Gray had grown up in Texas and had a voice that moved between R&B, country, and soul without seeming to try. He recorded country music in Nashville as well as soul and pop in other studios. He was genuinely versatile in a way that made it hard for the industry to place him in one category, which probably cost him a cleaner commercial path. The song has been covered dozens of times, most notably by Uncle Kracker in 2003, whose version reached number 9. Gray continued recording and performing until his death in 2011. Number 5, Timothy by The Boys. This one requires a bit of context. Timothy was released in 1971 by a Pennsylvania rock band called The Boys. and it reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 despite, or perhaps because of, radio stations refusing to play it once they figured out what it was about. The song tells the story of 3 miners trapped underground after a cave-in, and the 2 survivors emerging without any sign of the third, named Timothy. The song was written by Rupert Holmes, who would later write Escape, the Pina Colada song, and create the Broadway musical The Mystery of Edwin Drood. At the time, he was a young songwriter trying to get his work recorded. He deliberately made the subject of the song ambiguous enough that it could slip past radio screeners, and for a while, it did. When the implication became clear, several stations pulled it. Others leaned into the controversy, which helped drive the single up the charts. The Boys never charted again. Holmes, of course, had a long career ahead of him. Timothy remains one of the stranger stories in early 1970s pop radio. Number 4, Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum. Norman Greenbaum was a Jewish musician from Massachusetts who wrote a gospel rock song about dying and going to Jesus, and somehow took it to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1970. Spirit in the Sky is built around one of the most recognizable fuzz guitar riffs in pop history, and it went gold, selling over 1 million copies. It was Greenbaum's first and only major hit. He had come from a brief stint in a jug band called Dr. West's Medicine Show and Junk Band, which had a minor novelty hit in 1966. Spirit in the Sky was a different kind of record entirely. Raw, jubilant, and strange, recorded with a fuzz guitar tone that Greenbaum created by wrapping aluminum foil around his pickup. Greenbaum later said he was drawn to the imagery of gospel and country music, not as a religious convert, but as a songwriter who found the language compelling. After the song's success, he released more albums and toured, but nothing connected in the same way. The song, however, has appeared in more than 60 film soundtracks, making it one of the most licensed tracks of its era, from Wayne's World to Apollo 13 to Little Nicky. Greenbaum largely stepped away from the industry and settled on a goat farm in Northern California, which seems like a perfectly reasonable outcome for a man who wrote that song. Number 3, The Logical Song by Supertramp.
When I was young, it seemed that life was so wonderful.
Supertramp were a British band who had been recording since 1969, but found their commercial footing later in the decade. The Logical Song was released in 1979 from the album Breakfast in America and reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 7 in the UK. It was written by Roger Hodgson, who sang it in that distinctive, slightly strained tenor that defined so much of the band's sound. The song is a genuinely strange pop hit, a meditation on the loss of childhood innocence and the way education and society shape identity into something unrecognizable from the person you started as. It asks, fairly directly, who are we when the world is done molding us? For a song that reached the top 10 in multiple countries, it's an unusually philosophical piece of pop music. Breakfast in America went to number 1 in the United States, sold over 20 million copies worldwide, and became one of the best-selling albums of 1979. Supertramp were a genuine commercial force at that point. They split in 1983, reunited, and split again. Hodgson and founding member Rick Davies have maintained a complicated professional relationship since. Hodgson has toured and recorded consistently as a solo artist and still performs The Logical Song to audiences who remember exactly where they were the first time they heard it. Number 2, Magnet and Steel by Walter Egan.
Now I told you so, you ought to.
Walter Egan was a Los Angeles-based singer-songwriter who had connections through the Southern California music scene of the late 1970s, most notably a friendship with Fleetwood Mac's Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. Buckingham and Nicks produced his 1978 album Not Shy, and Nicks sang background vocals on Magnet and Steel, a fact that was an open secret at the time and gave the song a slightly different resonance than it might have had otherwise. The song reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1978 and is one of those tracks that fits perfectly into the soft rock AM radio sound of its era. Smooth, warm, and built around a melody that stays with you well after you've stopped listening. Egan had one more minor chart entry and then receded from mainstream visibility. Magnet and Steel reappeared periodically over the years in television soundtracks and streaming playlists dedicated to the late 1970s sound, keeping it alive for people who remember it and introducing it to people who don't. Nicks's harmony vocal on the track is unmistakable once you know it's her. Number 1, Driver's Seat by Sniffin' the Tears.
Little driving on a Saturday night.
The last song on this list might be the least expected. Snip and the Tears were a British band led by songwriter Paul Roberts, and Driver's Seat was released in 1978. It reached number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1979 and was a moderate hit across Europe. The band never charted again in the United States. What's unusual about Driver's Seat is how well it holds up. It's a tight, lean rock track built around a circular guitar hook and a slightly detached vocal that fits the late 1970s post-punk adjacent mood without being either disco or punk. It sounds like a snapshot of a very specific moment in pop music, when things were shifting and nobody was quite sure what was coming next. The song has stayed alive largely through its repeated appearance in film and television soundtracks, particularly car chases and driving sequences, where the title alone makes it an obvious choice. Roberts continued making music under the Sniff and the Tears name for years, though without any further commercial profile in the United States. Driver's Seat remains the one thing most people know, if they know anything. 15 songs, 15 stories that most of us heard constantly once, and then somehow let drift to the back of the memory. That's the thing about the 1970s. It was such a full decade of music that even the songs that were genuinely everywhere got buried eventually. If any of these brought something back for you, drop it in the comments. And if you want more of this, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more worth remembering.